for your country.
Welcome back to the Mike Huckabee Show. That great quote by John F. Kennedy was the kind of America I grew up with as a child, remembering so vividly not just that one quote, but really the whole pervasive atmosphere of this country, which was nobody owes you anything. You owe the country something. And we were just sort of led to believe that's just the way it was. And now it seems like increasingly people want to know, what is the government going to do for me? And there was a startling article in the Wall Street Journal this weekend by Nicholas Eberstadt that I just am stunned with the clarity of it. And we have Nicholas Eberstadt with us here right now on the Mike Huckabee Show. Nick, thank you for joining us. I want to tell you, your article was one of the most powerful I've read in quite some time, called A Nation of Takers, America's Entitlement Epidemic, which is the name of a book you have coming out in October.
Yep.
Tell me how you first decided to even make the connection between entitlements and a sort of a new sense of morality.
Well, I mean, it's not as if it's exactly a secret, Governor. It's you might say it's the gorilla in the room that we're all living with in modern America. We've gone from we see it transforming our country before our eyes in all sorts of ways, and I just thought that it might be useful to kind of pull together some facts and figures about it. We've seen the U.S. government literally turned upside down in the course of living memory, from a federal government where $1.03 was going to entitlements to one where $2 out of 3 are going to entitlements, and only 1 is being used for governance. And it's got an enormous, and I would argue a kind of a corrosive effect on the American way of life.
Now, you have a book coming out in October. It's available to be pre-ordered now, and I hope people will go ahead and get their order in. I guess they can get that on Amazon and various suppliers.
Exactly. Amazon, or they can Google it. It's called A Nation of Takers, America's Entitlement Epidemic. It'll be out at the beginning of October.
Some of the information that was in the journal article I found very fascinating. One is that there's about $2.2 trillion a year that is being paid out to people in benefits from the government, 100 times what it was back in, 1960?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, dollars were worth more in 1960 than they are today, but even after you do the controls for inflation and population growth, it's over 7 times as much as it was 50 years ago. The entitlements have been growing about twice as fast as American national income, so they're taking up a greater and greater fraction of our GNP.
And one of the things that people seem to forget is that if we give out these wonderful things, and nobody would argue against it, it's fine to help people who are in various levels of personal distress, but somebody's got to pay for these things. And it really amounts to a massive redistribution of personal wealth and really collective wealth.
Well, it's not just redistribution among people who are alive today. Just in the same way that it's easy for localities to put taxes on hotels because the guests are just passing through, it's becoming easier and easier for our entitlement programs to tax the unborn. So we do that through national debt. And to a greater and greater degree, our social entitlement programs are based upon promises of payments by our children and grandchildren and who knows how many other future generations for things that we're consuming today.
One of the things, Nick, that you point out in the article is that over half of Americans are now getting some type of benefit from the government. It would appear that one of the dangers herein, implicitly, is that when that many people are getting benefits, it's very hard for them to ever want to see a cut in government programs because it means they will personally be affected by it.
Well, I think you've put your finger on something, Governor. It becomes more and more a matter of voting against your immediate financial interest in rein in entitlements if you have a majority of citizens in this country getting some benefits from them. It encourages, what would you say, a kind of a short-termer mentality.
I'm visiting with Nick Eberstadt. He is the author of an article in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend and an upcoming book called A Nation of Takers, available in October, but you can purchase it now in a pre-order. There was another piece of this that I found intriguing, if not embarrassing, and that is that under Republican presidents, entitlements actually have increased historically more than they have under Democratic presidents. I think that would surprise most of us.
Well, certainly the Democratic Party is perceived as the party of entitlements quite widely. I mean, I don't think there's much of a debate about that in terms of perception. But when you look at the actual speed and pace of the growth of entitlements, you find that it's actually been significantly quicker under Republican administrations. If you think of who the Republican presidents have been over the last 50 years, President Nixon, President Ford, George W. Bush, under those administrations, entitlements grew really very quickly. Not so under President Reagan or under President H.W. Bush, but on the whole, it's been faster under Republican administrations.
Was that because of pressure from Congress, or was it because that was the initiatives that were led by those Republican presidents?
Well, I think it is because of the dynamic between, for the most part, Democratic-controlled Congresses and those Republican administrations. And certainly President Nixon was rather far from the Milton Friedman mentality of limited government. Remember his price and wage controls and so forth. But the dynamic between the two sides, I think, has empirically did encourage more rapid entitlement growth, even after controlling for inflation under those administrations.
One of the points that you point out in this article is, and I think the title of it was called, Are Entitlements Corrupting American Morality? So I want to get back to the idea that this is not just an economic issue, it's a moral issue. I think the critics would probably say, how so? How is it a moral issue rather than an economic issue? What's the morality involved in whether a person is a dependent or a producer?
Well, I mean, you can see some of the tendencies coming home to roost in our before our eyes. With the rise of the entitlement state, we've seen a flight from work by men. The ratio of men over the age of 20 who are at work versus the total population of men is lower now than at any time since the Depression, and maybe actually even lower than in the Depression if we had good figures for that time. So there's the flight from work. There's the increasing temptation to game the system or even to defraud the system. This isn't just the old trope of welfare Cadillac that we heard about so long ago. Many of these entitlements are working America, middle-class America entitlements. One of the other corrupting tendencies, I think, has been to treat entitlements as sacrosanct and national defense as negotiable. I mean, there may be $700 toilet seats that we're paying for that we shouldn't be paying for, but the United States is going to have to spend something on national defense, and the entitlement state seems to be crowding out the future of our defense attention. And finally, the whole notion of the politics of something for nothing, which is really what so much of the entitlement approach is all about, encourages a politics of redistribution, which I think pits citizen against citizen in a very unhealthy way over the long term.
Well, Nick, I found the article absolutely intriguing, and I'm sure others will find your book to be the same. Comes out in October, called A Nation of Takers, America's Entitlement Epidemic. Nick Eberstadt, thanks for joining us today on the Mike Huckabee Show.
Thank you for inviting me.